Hi everyone. I am very excited because finally we are doing something that we've been planning for over a year. We've been talking about doing something, and I have been telling my friend that we should do something that will benefit a lot of people. I know I'm being very mysterious. It's just that I'm very excited to announce that we are going to be starting a new series called Keeping It Real. And you know who I'm going to be doing it with? I'm doing it with Arti Rajaratnam. So immediately all of you ask, you and Artia, how is that possible? Wait, let us bring her in.
Yes, Anu, finally, I think after all our ice cream meetings, all our plans to travel to places to record this, we're finally doing it on Zoom. I'm so excited to be a part of this, and I'm glad that this message is going to go to a lot of people, and we're going to be keeping it real right through. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, really looking forward to it. And you know, the reason why we started the topic, that we picked the topic, we have to tell the people that as well, right? So the first of this series, we're going to try and do this as a 6-part series. And the first of this series that Aarti and I are going to do is going to be on toxic relationships, because all of you looked at her blog and there was so much activity on the comment section, and there was so many thoughts that were resonating. So that's why. So the first topic we picked up is toxic relationships. So,
and I think it's so important that we talk about it, because I think at different points in our life, all of us have attracted toxic relationships into our life, or we've been toxic to somebody. And I think it's very important for us to talk about this, not from the diagnostic, dangerous angle, but more from just being able to understand our relationships and make life a better experience for each other. So I think we should sort of dive right into it, right? Because if we keep people just excited about seeing the two of us, it's going to become our usual ice cream meeting. So let's get into the topic. I think that's good.
Yeah. No, actually, what I have always been fascinated with is, we know that there are things other than the obvious things that make us happy, right? Somehow we know that good relationships make us happy. When I saw this Harvard study, the longest running Harvard study, they did this from 1939, and they did it with all these 720 odd men, and they kept tracking them to see, I believe they kind of checked people from the poorest of the Bronx neighborhoods to the affluent neighborhoods. There's a full cross section. What did they find as a result of this long running study? That good relationships make us happy. And it's fascinating to me, that I've always believed that, but it's fascinating that science can also prove it.
Yes, and also I think there was another study that came up which said that we live longer when we have happier relationships. And I think my parents could probably vouch for that, because I've seen in their generation people have lived up to 80, 90 years, and they've lived with each other, working through their differences and things like that. So I think at some point we may need to now redefine our relationships as well, because relationships have gone through huge transformations across generations, across the years. And right now, I think we read a lot more about unhealthy boundaries, a lot more about toxicity, which was not the case earlier. And if you ask me, is it because there were no toxic relationships back in the past, or is it that it's more now? I think we're becoming more aware of the things that make us happy right now. I think in the past, people just went with the flow, and now we're paying a lot more attention to how we can make our lives better. And I think that's where relationships make such a huge difference.
Yeah, but the thing is, ironically, every relationship that we start, and of course, unless of course it is a pugilistic one where we're wanting to punch each other's faces, but most relationships, I think we always start putting our best foot forward, right? We put our best foot forward, but it doesn't always stay that way, because it changes, right?
As people, we change, right? So naturally, our interactions are going to change. And that's where technically relationships go through 3 stages. And I need to mention it technically because, unless we understand where it comes from and why it's changing, we probably start wondering, did I do something wrong? Did the other person do something wrong? Is it something that I should be making all right? And we're holding on to things that are actually probably making us toxic. And that's where the 3 stages, the first stage in any relationship is what we call the courtship phase. And, it's in a friendship, it's in when you join a job, when you, start up working with a team, when you're in a intimate partner relationship. except probably with our parents, where we probably didn't have this advantage of starting off with a courtship. Most of us start with a courtship phase where we put our best foot forward. And what's more important in this courtship phase is that we are able to overlook the flaws of the other. So even if they did something wrong, we probably are so blinded, sometimes probably smitten, that we avoid seeing those negative things that come up. And we say, no, no, maybe just today, maybe just, one off kind of thing. And then it moves to the next stage, which is what most people really struggle with. We call it the conflict phase. And the conflict phase is something that every relationship goes through. And I sometimes feel, this 7-year itch and all that people talk about could be just like a form of a conflict. And it's not really the cheating and, all of that, but the fact that, my relationship is transforming. I'm no longer able to, keep up with this, putting my best foot forward. Let me just do something more. So that's when the conflict comes in. And the conflict sometimes could just be, I'm no longer able to communicate, or I'm getting triggered by everything that you're saying. And I'm like, who the hell are you to tell me this? Or why did you do this? That kind of thing. And relationships that are able to tide over this conflict by working through it neither become toxic nor end. They're able to move beautifully into the next phase, which we call the companionship. And I think when we really look at the most beautiful relationships, we don't look at the romance, we actually look at the companionship. Sometimes when you go out for a walk and you see like this elderly couple holding hands, or, somebody holding an umbrella for the other, or even with our animals, if you notice, the companionship is so sweet. Like, in the companionship phase, there's a beautiful trust that happens, and with friendship. And I think ours is also in the companionship phase right now, because conflict probably came in separation. Like, because you traveled out of the country, you were not here.
Yeah.
We couldn't see as often as we used to, or meet up as often. So I think the conflict had taken a totally different kind of a role. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the other thing also that I've noticed is when we start going back to how we start in the courtship phase, right? We do a lot of things that are unsustainable, right? It's not just about, I'm smitten by this person, or I really want to be this person's friend. It is more, I want to do everything I can to make sure that I'm doing my best. And that is not sustainable. Right? It is just not sustainable over a long period of time. After some time, when we realize constantly ignoring our needs and constantly ignoring what we want and constantly trying to put this thing forward is just not going to work. And I also love how our equation has things. So what, 2004, right? When we first met.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in 2004, we used to work out in YMCA together.
Yeah.
Then from 2007 onwards, there was not much contact. In between, I did do a workshop with you.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that one. It was hilarious. I think we really did something crazy. But anyways, yeah, it was beautiful as well.
So, and I think now we've reached a stage where we both come into our own individual persons. I feel somehow we found our space, and now we continue to relate in a much more intense manner, despite keeping that space. And it is the space that makes it so special as well, no?
And that's where I think in one of Khalil Gibran's poems, he talks about how love is sometimes in the togetherness and sometimes in the spaces. Yeah. And I think if, as human beings, we're able to acknowledge that it's not always togetherness and it's not always spaces, and bring about a beautiful balance, I think we move away from being toxic for each other to being able to, bring out the best in each other without having to be in the courtship, without neglecting ourselves, neglecting our needs. And I think that's the balance that most of us as human beings are trying to sort of achieve.
You say that when it comes to through the conflict phase, and then there is if I may use this visual, there is a companion phase, or there is an end phase, or there is a toxic path. There are three paths, right? It could go down any path. Am I right? I mean, I'm talking only about experience, in my experience, because my relationship.
The visual, when you're saying it would go this way, I don't think the toxic is actually away. The toxic is probably more like this. As a visual, because what happens, if it's ending, it's already this way. Okay, and if I'm together, it's sort of like a genuine, hand-holding kind of thing, or, companionship. But when it's a toxic, I think one person is unequally biased, and against the other person, or trying to control the relationship or trying to contain it, things like that. So I think as a visual, I would probably use this more than
the divergent path.
Parting ways, it's something like that.
Yeah, but then you brought about a very important point, which is the inequality, which is the foundation of all toxicity, right?
Right.
No?
Actually, if I have to tell you what toxicity itself means, it's different from a poison, right? A toxin is something that's there in the environment, but you're not aware of it. Whereas with a poison, you're always aware it's there, which is why relationship toxicity is something people identify in hindsight. They sometimes, when the relationship is ended, they're like, what really went wrong? And then they see, oh my God, I ignored all these red flags. Yeah. It was always there staring me in the face. Why did I not see it? And like you said, the beginning is always that inequality.
Yeah.
Inequality, which is, I know that I was always having this position and you were always here, and I didn't do anything to fix it. I, in fact, did everything in my power to maintain it.
Yeah.
Right? So, and this person was trying to communicate, let me get here, but was always suppressed because this person was unable to do that. And so I guess that's where the base of toxicity starts.
Yeah, but then it could also be something to do with a personality disorder, right? Toxic relationships.
This is where, Anu, I really have to bring in, what's happening because of this information revolution that's happening. Everybody has an internet connection. So everybody is becoming an expert now. Okay? I mean, I know you're laughing, but
not
me. But jokes apart, I mean, somebody is quoting like this famous philosopher, and I called him back and I said, hey, I didn't know that you had this book. Can you sort of loan it to me, because I've been looking for this book? And he says, Akka, no, I only found his quote on Pinterest, or I found it on Twitter. And I was like, oh my God, even he came across as intelligent because he was picking this off. And that's where I think people, when they're going through a messy phase in the relationship, go onto Google, am I feeling this? And then it says, Google, how to mess with somebody's mind, right? So it's already telling them, maybe you're in a toxic relationship, take a toxic relationship quiz. And then, it has 20 questions or 10 questions. You do it and you're like, oh my God, I think my husband is narcissistic. And where this is dangerous, because personality disorders are entire umbrella within our diagnostic text, right? And you can't just take everybody and put them under psychopathic personality, sociopathic personality. These are not things. I mean, just because your partner did not feel guilty with you, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have guilt. But then, because he didn't feel guilty with you, you decide, oh, probably this is a sociopath right now. And this is one of the most dangerous things that we're facing today, because I have clients who have already done all these quizzes and they're sitting in front of me saying, ma'am, I think I've married a narcissist. And Pavam, that man is such a sweet guy. It's just that they're two beautiful people who can no longer be beautiful for each other. They've become toxic because, there is this imbalance. And that's where I think we need to say that this is not a diagnostic criteria. I think it's a phase in the relationship that we need to acknowledge and work through. Because if we understand, become aware and work through, it's a beautiful way to move the relationship into a companionship.
Yeah. But I have had a lot of people coming and, people do come and tell me stuff when they have problems and all that. And my instinct is to say, oh, but I see a pattern here. Oh, I see a pattern here. Now, I don't want to fall into that bracket of that little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I'll ask the professional. There are patterns, right? There are patterns.
Yeah. And this is where I think, repetitive patterns happen. See, if you look at life, and if we look at life as an opportunity to grow through, we don't just go through things, we actually grow through things, right? So when you're looking at ways to grow through something, there are going to be challenges. And, there is one way of being a victim of that challenge, saying, look at what's happened to me. Everybody's mean to me. I'm such a giving person. Anu the rescuer can tell me more. But Anu the rescuer,
I have to rescue
everybody. Yes, Anu has to rescue everybody in distress, right? So Anu the rescuer knows that after she has rescued people, they just take her for granted. And that's a repetitive pattern as well. Because and it comes from a very good place within you, but it's toxic for the other person, because every time I'm going to rescue somebody, I'm actually dumbing down their own capacity to look for resources, right? In a crisis, yes, we can handhold, but if this is going to be a repetitive thing, and the person's like, whole of my life I've been rejected. Yes, you brought it on to yourself, because you self-sabotage that whole pattern. You're like, okay, I think this person's going to leave me, so before he leaves me, let me reject him. Let me do something. So, these kind of patterns. And I think somewhere in our later episodes, we'll talk about it a little more.
Yeah.
But these patterns are almost always repetitive, because, what the scientific base in that is, let's assume that my pattern is rejection. I feel rejected and abandoned. As a person, I always know how to deal with abandonment and rejection, because I've had so many experiences.
Yes.
However, I've never had to develop skills to accept acceptance, or to live through acceptance. So when somebody is very accepting, my mind goes into this, why is he so accepting? Or why is he so perfect? There must be some flaw. Who says, maybe he's hiding something. And then you're like, oh, this is my best friend now, because she's thinking just like me. And I move towards the rejection pattern a lot more. And invariably, this is also a way in which toxicity is sustained.
Yeah.
Because I will surround myself with people who are able to validate the hunch I'm having. And this hunch could just be self-doubt. It's not intuition, right? It's self-doubt coming from my insecurity, and not intuition coming from wisdom. And that's something that I think we need to address when toxicity is a part of the pattern.
I was going to say that then we also have to see whether I am the toxic person in the relationship. Am I ready for a relationship?
Yes. Right? I'll probably talk about, am I the toxic person in the relationship? We are very, very comfortable looking at the other one being the problem. Yeah. But, any problem is from both sides.
No, always somebody else only is a problem. I am never a problem. Am I?
I know. So, invariably, in a toxic relationship, it's never about one person. Because if I'm doing something, the other person is doing something to sustain it or maintain it.
Yeah.
Okay, I would always ask, when you're saying that this person is always abusive, what part of you is resonating with that? Or if you're saying this person is always, ignoring me, what part of you is validating or allowing that?
Allowing it.
And the most important part, am I ready for the relationship? And this is very important, Anu, because, especially, when your hormones are raging and all, like moving from adolescence into young adulthood and all, I'm sure all of us have had our crushes, and, we can talk about it in another segment.
I'm sure people will be very interested to know.
Very happy. I know. And believe me, that won't end in 1 hour, because I have so many failed stories to talk about. Jokes apart. We'll compliment each other.
Yeah.
We already know, we've talked about it, but when we talk in a session, can you imagine how much drama will be there? But coming back, am I ready for a relationship? So many times, infatuation happens, but because it's I've already been fed by these romantic concepts of love has to be like this and all. I get into the relationship, and then I don't know where to draw the line. And then it ends. For whatever reason it ends. It could be because both of us couldn't get along, whatever. It ends. And then I'm just feeling so rotten. And then anybody who comes and makes me feel slightly better, I'm like, oh, this is the love of my life.
Yeah.
And many times we get into the next relationship because I've just ended from conflict, and I'd somewhere like to again feel courtship, because courtship makes me feel good.
Yes.
Imagine somebody's doing something beautiful. Like, for example, even in a friendship, in the courtship period, you make more time to speak over the phone, even if you're in a different city, or, you choose to go out for a meal together, go out for a coffee together. But when you move to companionship, you may not necessarily do that so often. In fact, I think we've probably gone out in all these years, probably 2 or 3 times. That's about it. But that's also why it's worked very well. Because imagine if we had these expectations that every Tuesday we'll go out or every Wednesday we'll speak. I'm sure we would have killed each other by now. You know?
We would have definitely punched each other's faces in sheer frustration.
I know. And I'm just saying that, somewhere, even that's a form of toxicity because people tend to, take those things as absolute
Yes.
rules. And that flexibility that's required in a relationship is overridden by this routine that I've brought in. And sometimes
Yes.
routines, especially in relationships, can be extremely toxic if the person is not in a comfortable space to be able to respond.
It's stifling.
Oh, yes.
The moment you put a condition and you start saying that, if you care about me, then every 2 days we have to do this, every 3 days this has to be done. And it's like, you can't put a computer program and put code about, how you will sustain a relationship.
Right, Anu, it's not computer program, people. It's an Excel sheet which will be color coded and it will be sent. And when you look at the Excel sheet, you're like, oh my God, if you're deviating from this, she's going to kill me. Okay, but having said that, people get
Excel sheet helps you. Okay, that Excel sheet is what keeps us on track.
Excel sheet followed by WhatsApp message clarifying every point on the Excel sheet. But jokes apart, what I'm trying to say is it's good for work, but when it comes to a relationship, I think that can be very, very dangerous. Imagine every Tuesday, 11 o'clock, we have to have conversation. And on that particular Tuesday, I could be very tired.
Yeah.
I may have something else lined up. And, if we start taking these as serious lapses in the relationship, imagine how dangerous it would become. Will I ever be ready for a relationship? Of course, I'll be ready for a relationship when I'm in touch with myself. Because a relationship is where I'm willing to give of myself, not because I'm lacking something. I'm willing to be with another person because both of us have something to contribute towards each other, not towards another person's lack, but towards the other person as a whole. And that's where I think toxic relationships don't fit in. Because when I feel complete, I cannot be toxic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Patterns, because the moment you said it, I realized you used one word, complete, right? And I've always had a problem with, but I am a romantic, right? I love happy stories. I love happy endings and love and all of that. In fact, that cupboard that is behind me is like full of romance, right? It's either action or romance. And the hero never dies, by the way. But I digress. But when you said complete, I always found it uncomfortable when someone said that you complete me. Because when I say you complete me, that means I'm incomplete. I don't want to think that I'm incomplete on my own. So which brings us nicely.
The first pattern.
Yeah,
that's the first pattern.
Pattern, right?
In fact, there was an insanely famous Hollywood movie where the heroine tells the hero, "You complete me," and I think a lot of people, a lot of women especially, fell for that, saying, "Wow, what a beautiful romance." And I think if somebody is doing that, that's probably the most toxic thing. In fact, if you look at it, it comes from the premise that somewhere I'm incomplete and that I will need somebody else to fill me.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest dangers if I'm going to believe that, I'm broken as a child, I didn't have a great childhood, so I'm going to meet somebody who's going to fill all these things. And it's a very cinematic thing as well. Unfortunately, if you look at many of the popular movies, the culture is where the heroine or the hero is already alcoholic, already, broken and everything, and the other person's love comes and tries to change them. And if you look at it, that's such a shameful thing because, that's also the reason why the heroine, if she's completing the hero, can never leave the relationship because that will be one of the things that's holding her back, saying, if I don't
she completed him.
Yeah, so if she leaves, then he'll die and all.
He'll die.
Yeah, so all these very false things, and a lot of popular literature around the soulmate thing are also built into this unfortunate pattern where you feel that somewhere you'll find a soulmate from another planet probably, and then that person will make you feel whole, complete. No, I think all these are just ways in which we suck up to the culture that's around us, and I think we shouldn't fall into that pattern at all.
So if complete me is a pattern, then what would be the solution?
One is, see, in all of these patterns, like I said, we'll have to start with the self. If complete me is a pattern, I'm somewhere deeply driven by the fact, or the belief rather, by the belief that I'm incomplete in some way. So I would spend a lot of time sitting with myself and see what parts of me don't feel complete. And
Yeah.
if you really look at it, Anu, when we're growing up as children, we freeze at certain ages. Some difficult experience makes me feel that I'm going to stay at this age. For me, for example, one of the most toxic things that had happened when I was very young was I was an awful student. So I was always made to believe that I was not intelligent, right? So,
Mm.
it just kept me there. It just kept me stuck in that pattern. So when I had to, sort of grow up and grow out of that pattern and actually acknowledge that I could do something, I had lost many years of my life. And,
Yes.
I would always think that other people were much better than me. I was always placing myself lower than people who were not even there. And I would always say I'm a student of my work, I'm learning through my work. Yes, but I didn't realize it was coming from the fact that I was feeling extremely incomplete.
Mm.
And toxic relationships could be your relationship with work as well. It need
Yeah.
not just be a person. Right?
Yeah.
And for me, in the workspace, I always felt incomplete. And I would overreach, do so much because I wanted to feel complete. But when I let that go and I heal that pattern, it became so beautiful. It was an authentic connection with people. And
Yeah.
that, I think, is something priceless. I would never ever trade it for anything else.
Yeah, yeah. No, and when you look at this pattern, my pattern in relationships has not only been the rescuer, it has also been that one person's effort that you mentioned, right? I will
Yeah,
hold the whole thing up completely because it's my responsibility. I'm capable, I'm strong. It took me many years to understand I don't have to do that.
and I've seen you do that as well. I've seen you do that so many times. And, that's when the solution to that would be reminding yourself that you're not the general manager of the whole universe.
Yeah.
Right? You'll have to realize that sometimes you should just let the person take care of themselves.
Yes.
Nobody needs that kind of rescuing.
Mm.
I mean, even somebody who is completely ill is capable, they have resources.
Correct.
But when I start doing the one person's effort, like you mentioned, that being the second pattern, what we're really doing is stunting the other person. Because we notice after a point, Anu, in all of those relationships, the other person would have just taken it very casually. It's like, yeah, she'll anyway take care of the relationship. Let me just chill now. That kind of thing will happen.
So what has happened that I have seen is because it has been this where I take the load, I take care of the relationship, they also assume that I don't need taking care of, which
Yes.
became a big issue for me when I lost Amma and Appa, because now suddenly I'm surrounded by people for whom I've done a lot, and I didn't do it expecting them to do anything for me, but I've done a lot, but it doesn't occur to them that I need kindness, that I need care, I need a little bit of, coddling even if, in fact, if I've just gone through that terrible, consequent quick losses. It didn't occur to them. And I realized that it is also because I set that pattern, right?
Right, and that's why it's a repetitive pattern. If we actually go back and we say, oh, I've done this in this relationship as well, I've done it here as well, I've done it here as well, and you go back and it's somewhere in your teens or even earlier than that, you started taking care of people, right? And so you still believe. So I think it's also growing up at some point, to realize that just like I can take care of myself, the other person also can. And that could be the solution.
Yeah,
yes. And that's the solution to that pattern as well.
And it has worked for me now. So now in my equations and relationships, when I have that compelling need to immediately go and sort out their problems, set them right, I said, wait, let's see what they're going to do. And about 2 or 3 times I stood and watched and they managed, right? And that comforts me that, okay, you don't need to be, like you said, the general manager of the universe. They're capable of doing it.
Right.
I mean, there are other patterns as well, right?
Yes, and I would bring in the next pattern, which is called the scorekeeper. So, the scorekeeper is like the most dangerous. I know you're one. I know you're one. So, the scorekeeper. So, the scorekeeper typically is the one that's going to remember all the things that you did and did not do. Okay, and they're likely to remember the ones that you did not do and they expected. So, on that day you forgot my birthday, or when I said hello, you turned your face and went away. And I've had this a lot in work. I used to have a scorekeeper colleague of mine. She say, I was in the corridor and I waved to you and you didn't see me. And because I wear glasses, many times, what would happen is, in the glare of things, I would just sort of miss out. And I may not have seen her. And, I'll be wondering, when was this Tuesday that she was standing there and I didn't see her? But in a relationship, imagine if it's just a colleague at work, it's still not so dangerous. Imagine if this is your spouse, or if it's your best friend. And even worse, if it's a parent. I'm glad that my parents were not scorekeepers. Imagine if my parents kept score for all the times that I misbehaved in school, or all the times I got into trouble. I probably would never get bailed out. But the scorekeeper is very dangerous, in the sense that they tend to overlook all the positives and start holding on only to the negatives. And it becomes a very, like a sticky situation for the other person, because he or she is always, walking on like
eggshells.
Eggshells, or I would even use quicksand, because you don't know when it's going to suck you up. And the worst thing with quicksand, it's not instant. It takes you down slower and slower, and the more you struggle, the faster it sucks you in. And that's the dangerous part of the toxic relationship, because you're stuck, and it's pulling you in, but it's so slow. It kills you inch by inch, and that's so scary. That's why the scorekeeper is a very dangerous part. And if you ask me how you come out of that pattern, you'll need to realize, when you keep score, both people lose. Right? Whenever you're keeping score, you're also pushing the other person to a space where they're going to keep score. And that's probably the most dangerous aspect of keeping score in that relationship.
So this is basically your area. So just, why don't you run through all the patterns? Because you know why? Because now I know all my patterns have been covered. Now you cover the other patterns. So I should sit back.
I don't think we've covered all your patterns though.
Oh!
So the other one, which is probably my pattern, building my world around one person. Or the other extreme, run by one person. So when I say building my world around one person, I remember when I started out in life, I built my entire world around the school I was running. And everybody significant to that school was significant in my life. I had missed out on so many other aspects of my life, because my world revolved around that one person. And so when that one person left, and that one school closed down, I was completely shattered. And the other extreme of this is run by one person. One person decides, okay, there is this other person I can control, and my decisions will be everybody's decisions. And in fact, unfortunately in India, many family structures are actually run by one person. The breadwinner in the home decides for everybody. If I decide that we should go here, this is where we will go. And it's not a financial decision as much as it is a control decision. So, it's more really control. So I would definitely talk about, understanding that this building your world around one person, or allowing one person to decide for everyone, both are very, very toxic patterns. It's important to realize that we need to reclaim our worth. Because when I put all my efforts on somebody, I need to reclaim my worth. I need to understand that I'm also contributing towards this relationship. And most important, the solution for this will be to let go. To understand that no one else can be the center of my universe. I need to be the center of my universe, because if I'm not centered in my universe, I'm going to be all over the place. Right? Because, if you take the Niels Bohr atomic model, if you're not the nucleus, which is basically neutral, and you're going to be just one of the electrons in the shells, remember, you're just going to, not be so significant.
You're not going to be stable. Stability comes from center. And that's core. If you're going to be on the periphery, then you're not going to be stable. And definitely that's going to lead to a breakdown.
And that's why this run by one person is a very dangerous pattern. Another extremely common pattern is emotional blackmail and possessiveness. And if you notice that that is something that's also toxically portrayed in news and articles, where we bring in the toxic stalking culture and all of that, and somehow romanticize the whole thing, saying he loves her so much, so he's stalking her. I think it's absolute nonsense, right? And in fact, earlier also in our discussion, we were talking about, if you don't do this, I will not talk to you. You don't love me if you. So this emotional blackmail pattern is very, very painful, because what happens is that the person who's being blackmailed, after a point, will just become very, very immune to this. If let's assume that you're blackmailing me every time, and then you're like, you're going to give me these threats. Let me see. And that's when they start also seeking other relationships that fill this void. And I'm not talking only from betrayal and cheating in a marriage. I'm just talking about even general friendships where I say this friend is always draining me or always controlling me. Let me just hang out with other people.
So being on the other end of a relationship that was emotionally blackmailing me, I have been on that end. And let me tell you, when you already have a rescuer pattern, and then you're with that blackmailing pattern, it is a worst combination ever. Because not only am I fighting that person's pattern, I have to fight my own pattern as well. It was doubly difficult, and it took me many, many years to be able to see sense and, say that this is not working.
And Anu, what you brought up is very significant, because always this pattern will attract a similar, we call them codependent patterns. Right? So it's not like, it doesn't mean that I'll be perfectly fine and I'll get somebody who's toxic. I will have a pattern that will be complemented by another pattern. So today I'm not going into codependent patterns as much, because I want just people to understand how this works. Because, when people blame someone, they need to understand that something in me is sustaining it. So if I were to go into the next pattern, because, let me just talk about how emotional blackmail is dealt with. See, when you're having possessiveness and when you have emotional blackmail, the two things that work are to develop trust on yourself. Because once you start trusting yourself, it's easier to trust the other person, and more importantly, communicate. Because when you start saying, see, this thing that you're doing is not okay, or this is how I like it, sometimes the other person who may be unaware of the pattern, many times we're unaware, and we may be even mirroring our parental patterns. Like, if the child has always been an emotionally blackmailing mother, he or she is going to be emotionally blackmailing, thinking it's normal. Right? So if I'm doing that and my partner tells me, listen, I think you're sort of making me very uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, am I doing that? And that awareness many times is just enough for me to be able to communicate through. And that's one thing. And I have your idealism and romance pattern, which is typically you. So that's your typical pattern. And why I wanted to spend a little time on this was, we've been fed into this thing that love at first sight, that music will change, rose petals will fall and all that. I mean, no, I object. This is not my pattern. I never thought there'll be a prince in shining armor. I never thought rose petals will come and all of that. No. I strongly object, Your Honor. We know your romance pattern is probably built around ice cream and something like that.
Who's going to buy me chocolate cake? Sorry, I digress. Go ahead.
So coming back, when we talk about idealism and romance, why it's dangerous is because I have this, mental image that a perfect relationship means this, perfect person means this. And, if that person even moves slightly away from those expectations, there's such a huge disappointment. And I start feeling extremely broken, saying, I didn't really sign up for this. Everybody else is like this and all of that. So that's where this idealism and romance is dangerous, because I need to realize that as human beings, we all have our positives and negatives. There will be flaws, there will be strengths. And the more I understand that I can embrace both, just like I've embraced both sides of me and I embrace both sides of the other person, this relationship moves into companionship. Otherwise, I'm going to always have, but my mother cheated me, she got me to marry you, and you're such a horrible person. It's complete nonsense. You need to find a bridge upon which both of you can communicate and understand that you no longer need bridges, because you're in a comfortable space now. It's not like you're on two different sides. You're on the same side, working through life. And I think that's a very important aspect of idealism and romance. So keeping it real is very important in that. The next pattern, of course, is passive aggression, which is what I think my parents were very good at, and I know a lot of Indian parents are, which is like, I don't want to, I'm angry with you, but I'm not going to tell you. I will just do silent treatment. I won't speak to you. But the jar of jam or whatever will come and hit the table
loudly. I've seen this.
Right? Or shut the door, bang, and then you're like, I won't talk to you, but all these objects will talk on my behalf. That's such a dangerous thing. And I've seen also a lot of teenagers do that to their parents. They've had a conflict with the parent, parent also is like sticking to their guns and this child also doing this. So the child says, the best thing I can do is to shut the door loudly and go inside. And I've also seen in more recent times the TV volume going up. Because it's like, I don't want to listen to you, I'm listening to something else. That kind of thing.
The TV is now my equivalent of na 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 na. That's what it is.
In fact, my brother has a T-shirt that says, I will listen to anything but you. Right, and that's the passive aggressive pattern. And where you can bring out this is, again, you have to realize that there is a communication breakdown. Passive aggression is a typical communication breakdown. And you'll need to understand that, if you take a continuum, there's one side which is aggression, the other side which is passivity, and in between is assertiveness, where I'm able to become aware of my needs, communicate my needs without hurting you. Willing to also listen to you, your needs, and bring that equality back in place. So I no longer need to use that jam jar to, speak for me. I can use my voice. And I would say the most beautiful thing is use your voice, because it's such a beautiful part of us. And when we use it to a person we love, I think there's nothing more beautiful than that.
When you are comfortable saying that, this is what upset me and this is what I like. And when that person, and you come from a good place and that person kind of connects with that, no? That's where, like you say, it goes into that companionship thing, because then you get even more, there is a great comfort in that equation.
Yes. And I'm so glad we're doing this. As I'm doing this, I'm feeling extremely warm, very very, very supported and loved. So thank you. I think I just need to tell you that.
Thank you.
It's just that. But the last pattern is shaming and normalizing. And that's also something that builds into the rape culture in any society. But what I mean by this is, we make fun of people who have a certain physical appearance or a skin type or hair or, don't fit into a stereotype of a gender or, so many aspects of it. So I start shaming. And then when I'm shaming, it's usually done like a joke. So just recently, I have to tell you, there's a student of mine who messaged me saying, ma'am, I've just been engaged to somebody. It's an arranged marriage. And every day, he makes fun of my appearance. Yes. And what are you doing about it? So she said, I told him twice that I don't like it. And he said, come on, it's just a joke. Come on, it's just a joke when it's hurting someone, is what I'm meaning by shaming and normalizing. I shame you and then I normalize it. I shame you and then I normalize it. And then I leave you feeling that you are the inadequate one.
And you're the one who has overreacted. I can tell you an incident which exactly happened this way, right? Again, I learned a lot in the 2-3 years that I lost Amma and Appa, because that kind of gave me my perspective on what am I doing in relationships and what are the relationships around me. So I had something very hurtful happen. And when I reacted with hurt, the statement was, I am disappointed that you reacted that way. It was just a joke. And this is when the person knew that I was crying so much that I was throwing up. If that amount of distress has been caused by your joke, it was a bad joke. It's as simple as that. That's what kind of a switch went off in my mind. And I said, whoa, hang on a minute. Why? Usually I would have thought, oh, is it a joke? Should I have taken it well? And I said, no. And I realized, no, this is normalizing something that is not okay. Right? Am I correct in this interpretation?
That's a beautiful example of shaming and normalizing. Because not only will they say it's a joke and, sort of put you down, they don't change. No. Because, I always say the best apology is changed behavior. You don't need to say you're sorry. You just need to ensure you don't repeat it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Right? And if you don't change behavior, you've not really apologized. Because I don't need to tell you I'm sorry. I need to show you that I am and I've changed. I understood. I took your feedback. I love you enough to take this feedback and to change myself at points where there is a change that's required. I'm not going to change myself for you. I'm going to change the parts of me that think it's okay to shame you and hurt you.
Correct.
And that is very important in a relationship. So in my work, I have taken these patterns, and I'm sure other therapists would have other patterns as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a student of my work. So as I work with clients, I keep picking these patterns and we work through them. When it comes to shaming and normalizing, one of the things that we do is communicate. And if the person changes, excellent. But if not, I would start looking at it as the beginning of a toxic relationship. Because, just like we take drugs, smoking, for example, is not considered majorly addictive compared to some of the higher drugs. But we call smoking a gateway habit.
Yes.
Meaning, once I start smoking, I normalize other things. Right? Similarly, in a relationship, when I normalize this joking and misogynistic behaviors or language or derogatory speech, making fun of my body, body shaming, all of this, it becomes the pattern of abuse that can be built on later. And I think that's where we need to get our alarm bells out.
Yeah.
Because if someone cannot understand that shaming is wrong, they cannot understand that love is right.
Oh, yes.
I think that's where it goes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Put the patterns together, and
Yeah.
I think it came out well.
Yeah. No, we covered all the patterns. And do you want to do a quick recap? What is a pattern and what is the solution?
The first pattern is the scorekeeper, and the change in the scorekeeper will be to realize that when you keep score, both people lose. The second pattern is complete me, meaning I'm coming from a state of lack, expecting somebody else to complete me. And that's a very dangerous thing because I'm coming from lack. And when I'm coming from lack, I cannot be equal. So it involves a lot of work with the self where I understand that I am complete and whole as I am. The third pattern is where I build my world around somebody or the relationship is run by one person. This is where I realize that I need to let go. And I need to realize that I cannot build my world around one person or I cannot allow one person to, run my world. The fourth pattern would be emotional blackmail and possessiveness, where trust and communication come in as a very, very big part. Idealism and romance is the next part, and that's where we keep it real. In fact, our whole show is called Keeping It Real because I think it's driven by our incurable romantic tendencies that jump up at different points. And then, of course, our passive aggression part, where assertiveness would be the solution. And then you have the one person's effort, which is your classical pattern, where you're holding the whole thing and you realize you don't need to be the general manager of the whole universe. And the last pattern of normalizing and shaming and normalizing, which needs to be dealt with very seriously because it becomes the base for further abuse later on in life. And that's probably the entire set of patterns that I would talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Because when we talk about, as a layperson, when we talk about relationships, we only talk about the fact that, oh, this is going wrong. And when you know that you can actually look at what is going wrong, is there any pattern that is being followed? It actually demystifies to some extent about, relationships. It kind of says, what is going wrong? Who's the toxin? Is that person being, exhibiting toxic behavior, or is it me? Who needs to change? And does this work? How do we move? So I really feel, it's pretty late in life, but I have now come to a stage where I am saying that, boss, relationships actually have to be equal. We knew this when we were young, but we never applied it. And now I'm applying it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Arti, the thing is, it's really good to be able to identify patterns, but I feel that is only half the journey. I think the bigger journey would be in how do we correct it, how do we heal ourselves, how do we heal in general. So I'm sure there are some kind of guidelines that we can use.
So I can't give you like a prescriptive part because this is not something which is a problem that needs to be fixed, but more an awareness that needs to lead further. So some of this will require healing, some of this will require moving on, some of this will require letting go. And we'll need to understand which one will be best for that particular relationship. So the first thing I would use as a guideline is self-love. I need to understand that when a relationship is reflecting back to me a pattern, is it something that I need to do with self-love? Is it something that I'm not doing for myself? Because somewhere we mess up self-love with going for a massage and getting a pedicure and all that. Many times self-love has to do with just acknowledging that I'm whole and complete as I am. So that would be one. Second is to forgive the self and also to understand that the other person's patterns need not necessarily be the things that define me. Right? That would be the second thing that I would take. The third I would do is to realize that sometimes the only closure I can get is that I deserve better. Because many times as women especially, I know and I'm sure some men will disagree, but as women especially, we think that the other person is somehow going to change and understand us. And I think to realize that, we just deserve better is a very, very important aspect of ending a toxic relationship. And then, I need to become assertive and bring in healthy communication, healthy boundaries. That would be a complete, a U-turn in many relationships, because we notice many times this lack of communication, lack of healthy boundaries and being assertive is probably one of the reasons we run ourselves into the ground.
What we also don't do is just assume that if I communicate, he or she is not going to accept. So they don't even try.
Yeah, because we're coming from inequality, I just assume that certain things will not work. Because, when I'm in a position, in a disadvantageous position, I've already made assumptions that keep me the victim always. Right? And that's really where it goes back. And the last aspect of what I would do is to acknowledge that that toxic person was a beautiful person. Okay? Both of us are very beautiful people, but we're just toxic for each other.
Yes.
So I need to understand that though you are toxic, you were just what I needed at a particular phase in my life. To acknowledge that you are not the person who may be good for me now. In spite of having tried to work on it. So somewhere I think to understand this is a very important aspect of relationships, because not all relationships are meant for a lifetime. Some of them are there for a reason. Some of them for a very short season, and some for a lifetime. So if we can identify that, and though it will be very difficult to know whether I should hold on or whether I should try harder, it's one of the most difficult, painful decisions in life. We'll all get there and we'll get through. And I hope I've sort of put it together. I'm so glad we did this. And I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed putting it together for you.
Yeah, I had such a great time as well. And, it's not often that when two people are talking, we actually talk in a real manner. We talk about the whole thing as people who have made this journey, not as people who are advising you or standing in a position and telling you that, oh, this is how it needs to be done. No, we are all human beings. We are all doing this whole thing. We all make mistakes. We all learn. The important thing is that we learn, and the important thing is we keep it real. I hope you enjoyed this episode on toxic relationships. We'll come back next week with another topic. I'll let you know what the topic is. Oh, by the way, I know a lot of you will have questions that you would like answered. So what we're going to do is, I know me and my Excel sheets, we are going to put one Google form, and you can put in your questions about relationships on that. And the coming Friday, we will look at it and we'll answer it, and we'll post the answers to the questions. We will answer both as Arti the professional and Anu the fellow traveler. Okay? See you. Bye. Then bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.